Next up, we've got Maja Göpel. Maja, the floor's yours.
Good morning. I like when combining different points of view becomes a good big picture. And I think what's been shining through already in both what you heard from Andrew and from Neil is that we need to get at the question of purpose. That was very clear in where is it going to be a positive addition and where is it going to be maybe a negative loss. And other than that, obviously as a society as well, to think about technologies are things that people invent. And for now, we still have agency over which direction it should help us grow into. And so we should be very clearly asking what direction is it that we want to take as humanity. So what I'll bring here is an agency-based point of view where we can still say, how can these technological developments really help us as a human species with our potentials to thrive, rather than risking being substituted by machinery that is presumably more productive, presumably more effective at doing things, and doesn't need to sleep, doesn't have to have children, doesn't want to have a vacation. And I think it is that we have to think about this as an imagination of a future to be driving into. Because agency is built, I'm a political economist, and this is why I can associate to this capitalist strand. What is driving technological development is something we really have to look at. Because it's not just falling from the sky. We're not channeling it. There isn't some super intelligence that we're tapping into to become a next evolutionary space. There is people with interests, with ideas, with imagery of where we could go that we should be looking at, and then see who's investing in which of those directions to understand which path it's driving us into. And this is where transformability as a capability comes in, so that we stay in the steering seat rather than being steered. And this is why I would like to ground us, to find some priorities. I think it is essential to understand that humanity is still a biological species. Just inhale for a moment. Go. And notice that it even impacts how you're thinking, how you're probably relaxing a little bit, how everything becomes looser. It will have an effect of how you think. It will have an effect how you're processing things. And it will have an effect on us massively if we're not safeguarding the kind of webs of life that humans as biological beings are dependent on. The breathing is being possible because loads of roots underneath are cleaning the air for us in forms of the forests that are sitting on top. Water that we all depend on is something that is being circulated and cleaned by this planet that we live on. So I think when we talk about care, we should be careful not to lose out who we are, and to see that this embodiment is also something that carries a lot of intelligence and empathy, etc. in it, because it's vulnerable. And I think this is exactly where one of the focal points could be for our idea of priority setting. The other thing that makes the human species so successful up to now is cooperation. We wouldn't be here if we hadn't cooperated. So this whole story about being quicker if there is no friction is something that loses out on what emerges from our interactions and frictions, because a lot of times new things come from frictions and things not working out that they worked out before, or the way they worked out before. So we have to really cherish those and tap into them as an innovation potential. Because otherwise, and this is transformation in one image, we risk plowing down one path, this highway, until we will have to innovate because things just implode on our heads. It's a shock-based innovation system, and I think right now, in many of the Western countries at least, we're in the midst of that. We haven't used our capacity to imagine and to anticipate and use technology to do so in a way to act early and say, yes, we might want to chart a different path of development and have tech serve us in that direction, because we know the old path is breaking. Even though there's a friction element, that beginning of the path is still more strenuous, is still more challenging, because we just don't know yet how a new normal can look like that fits in a 21st century where a lot of our human activity has changed that one planet that we live on. And this is where transformability comes in. And it's a systems view. And I think this is something that we can see as a paradigmatic shift, probably, that you both have in technological developments, but it comes also from an understanding of ecology and how the things that we live on work together, but also societies. All of those are complex systems. And so if we start understanding those a bit more, we can see the drivers and the linkages and how they feed into each other to understand the trajectories that we're developing into. And this is why this capacity to create untried beginnings, step into the new path, to evolve into something fundamentally different, at a time when we know that something old becomes untenable, would be what I call progress. And that's the essence of what learning can help us to get to. Anticipate, understand how things hang together, and find the courage to innovate. And then what kind of structures and self-identities, etc., can help us with this. And I think we've had great ideas when we still had a common compass for the world development, like the SDGs were in 2015, the Global Sustainable Development Goals. It was very clear what you have to change is the ways that humans run their economies, that they build their infrastructures, that they treat their soils, that they use their oceans in order for a lot of people to still find a good life on this planet in the 21st century. And that impulse of this type of transformation came from understanding, through great observations driven by technological possibilities, that we are destroying what we depend on. And this is where I think this notion of values being an important part of understanding when do we take action, when do we find the courage, and what do we prioritize, also in terms of which knowledge to build on, is something that we should be very cognizant about. And what is excluded from the kind of knowledge space with which we're driving societies is visible in the United States to a very, very, very frightening way right now, when you see that universities are not allowed to put climate change information out there anymore, because it's called woke. That's going back to the Middle Ages. That's not learning. And then when we see how Grok in X is being catered towards a reality portraying, where more and more stuff is being geared towards Elon Musk's worldview of the future, rather than one that might be driven by scientific base, is yet more concerning. Because we're trained that those are objective ways of plowing what's out there in knowledge to bring it to us. And when you see how Elon Musk's bots have trained everybody on X to say, is that true, Grok? Is that true, Grok? It was a habit training to make people trust Grok more than their human counterparts. And then he can fiddle with the kind of data underneath with the algorithms, and we still think it's something like an objective thing. We have to be very cautious that we understand where data comes from and what data we want to look at in order to be able to set priorities, find the right values, and use technology to that end. And this is why I think this whole approach was really fundamental in bringing this to the next level, that we are allowed to unlearn some of the things, to relearn, and then collaboratively share what works, instead of being very cautious about what we dare to share, because we're stuck in a moment of total contrapetition. I'll come to that in a moment, why the culture is relevant for our learning, and why we have to look at who's driving our technological development right now, with what image of the future. Because this visioning, and I think Brian Arthur is a very great technology philosopher, he's been saying that every technological development is anticipated in a mind. Because when we think of it, everything that's now real has been imagined. And so we have to look at this imaginary future, both in a positive way, that's a backcasting methodology from future research, to say this is where we'd like to go. And I mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals as something I found to be a positive outcome. And then you backcast, when you look at the trends that we're on right now, that highway, where we have to change slowly but surely to get on the new path, and why collaboration is key in that. And now, in the final 5 minutes, I'd like to tell you why I think we really need to empower humans to see this, because we have very different ideas about the future to go down, and I think we already have to understand that it has to do with the planetary boundaries being hit. It's now being called something greeny, ecological, put it to the side again, something soft. We're in an age of geoeconomics, where a lot of the technological development is being used to access many resources. A lot of the economic power is being used to make sure that you get them, even military power is being used to that. We can't say this is softy. The understanding that this is the essence of survival is there. We just label it differently now. And we have to see that we're not going down this path, where everybody that's not powerful and ruthless and using technology to charter something like surveillance and a distribution of access in our societies, but to create something or defend something that is more democratic requires a different culture. This fear of being lost behind is not a helpful way of becoming creative and of sharing. And a lot of the problems that will only be solved if we're sharing the information and being allowed to learn from each other. So this is why this whole notion of how do we understand our own space, even or including a leadership role, is super important. In moments of crisis, we can do this thing, like everybody in it for themselves, trying to be swimming at the top, or we can step back and say, how are these things hanging together? That would be the systems view. And how can we recalibrate and share resources and intelligence to shape up a different system that can work again and get us out of the crisis? But that means you have a different mindset of what this is about. I'm just taking social media and its effects as a proxy here. And Facebook being cognizant of those effects, but wanting to feed its LLMs, that can then be turned into great agents for us that will dumb out our critical thinking. There's so much research now on those effects coming up on our brains, because those are complex systems as well. Neuroplasticity is just logics when you think of it. What you train will be staying there. It's like muscles. What you don't train won't stay there. And we call it productivity, which essentially might risk becoming a dumbing down of human potential. So how do we make sure that technology allows for us to see things, and allows for us to learn, and allows for us to find the strength that we remain intuitive, rather than feeling more and more, and we see it more in younger people already that are very prone to using those technologies, incapable of taking good decisions because we don't even trust an innate knowledge, a tacit knowledge anymore. So which learning spaces do we need to create to avoid this degradation of human potential? And not call this something anti-technological, anti-progress, but be real what technology should serve, what is the purpose, and who should stay in the steering seat, and which outcome of societies do we want? Because I think right now what we're risking to go towards is the spiral of powerlessness, and when you especially talk to younger people, it's very tangible. And this is starting from a mindset or an image of humanity, of everybody being selfish in it for themselves, and that it seems normal to just do whatever it takes to swim on the top. And then we're not capable, presumably, of sharing more, and that makes you want to be on top and rather not share and care for others. And then we must mistrust the kind of institutions that are supposedly serving the whole because they're inhibiting our freedom. Listen to Peter Thiel. Democracy is not compatible with freedom anymore. Whose freedom? The ones that are using Palantir to run surveillance systems that help ICE agents to find people in the last space where they're trying to hide for staying close to a family in a country they lived in 25 years for and served. So how do we get out of this, that everything is called a market development, or AI is just developing in that direction? It's not just developing in that direction. It's investments and mission statements, like OpenAI saying, we want to be able to do everything that humans can do. Why? Humans are already here. Why do you say you want to replace them? Why is Elon now investing a giant armada of robots? Because they don't like people. But that's problematic when at the same time they're saying we're going to shred the environment and the climate by sucking up the computational power for everybody else and buy ourselves islands to sit on when the rest comes down. These are not the people we want in the driving seat of our technological development. And we have to push back on this, and we have to be clear about it. Because then there is a whole different world to be had when we use the potentials of better monitoring, of better simulations, of better anticipation, well-informed with real data about how reality is changing. Then we can define which world we want to get to. We can develop the trust that we're able to share, that we can learn, and that we find the common solutions that will safeguard what we depend on, less have to have less conflict, and be able to find the trust and the ability that you can make mistakes and allow in this unlearn process to say, okay, yes, I didn't know this, but thank you for sharing. Instead of saying, oh my God, I asked a stupid question. I'm very intimidated because I was wrong. So let's go for the humane and the humanity at the center of technological development. And if you're interested in system thinking, this is where I try to make it as a life story, including a chapter on education. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.